In this episode of The Russell Brown Show, I'm going to be talking about something I'm calling natural HDR toning. Natural HDR toning is where you do not oversaturate your images, you do not over-sharpen your images, and you make them look more natural and realistic. As you can see from these samples, I've gone back in and looked at some of my earlier photography that I had previously done in a super sharp and super colorful way, and now I'm making them look a little bit more realistic. I have also processed some images here from a really great photographer by the name of Randy J. Braun, and he's taken these on the island of Maui. Again, low saturation, low sharpening, more realistic, as if you were there. Okay, let's see these techniques. Let's go back to this image right here that I've photographed. And then let's go look at the 3 different images that make up this final result right here. Before I get started, there's one thing I want to show you, a really great tip and technique. The first thing I'm going to do is to open these 3 images inside of Adobe Camera Raw. Here on the Macintosh, that's Command R or Control R on the PC, and it will open up those 3 images as you can see here to the left. Now, the one thing that I want to point out that can cause trouble with any HDR project, and that's chromatic aberration, your enemy. To solve this problem, I'm clicking on this item right over here, Lens Corrections, right there. Notice that I have the embedded lens profile checked. I really like this feature because it adds in all of these lens corrections as well as distortion, chromatic aberration, and vignette corrections, as you see down here. Now, what I like about this is that I have one slider that I can slide to remove and adjust the chromatic aberration. As we know, in the manual adjustments, you have to adjust 2 sliders. But if you turn on Enable Lens Profile Correction, the chromatic aberration is built into that correction, and you get to slide the slider and adjust it. I just want to show you, as I slide this to the right here, you can see a really bad case of chromatic aberration, and I'm going to zoom in really close so you can see this. This is bad. And of course, this is good. If you have any chromatic aberration happening at all within any of your images, it can cause havoc with an HDR project. So if there's one thing I'm going to point out here in Adobe Camera Raw, it's to eliminate or reduce the amount of chromatic aberration across all 3 of your images in this case. Once I've made this correction, I then do a select all and select synchronize to make sure that it synchronizes that across all of my images. Okay, I just thought you should know that. Let's cancel out of that because I have previously made that adjustment. And let's now get right into the natural HDR toning effect that I've been talking about. Here under the Tools menu and down here to Photoshop, I'm going to go over here to Merge to HDR Pro. And of course, I have all 3 of my images selected here in Bridge. Okay, here we are. Let's get started. Now, the first thing I want to point out, and I want you to remember this, in this tutorial and in this effect that I'm trying to achieve, I do not adjust the detail slider. Whoa, that's like a crime. If you adjust the detail slider, of course, we know that if you crank this over to the right, it gives you that look that you really want. But resist the temptation. I'm going to double click on that slider and put it back to its default location of 30%. Leave it there. The first thing I'm going to do is go right up here to the top to remove ghosts. Now, I recommend clicking on Remove Ghosts even if nothing's moving. I find I get a refinement, and I also find that I can adjust some of the artifacting I might get in my image by selecting Remove Ghosts, because I can go through, for example, and click on individual exposures within my set, and I can get different effects. For example, especially in details like clouds, where there's really subtle tonality changes across the cloud, I find better results can be achieved by going through the different exposures and seeing how it changes without any adjustments to your image. Okay, I'm going to leave it with that one. Now here comes my technique. My technique is based upon the gamma slider. That's right, you've never adjusted the gamma slider before, have you? The gamma slider, if you move it to the right, watch what happens. It makes it look really weird. You move it to the left, it makes it look weird again. But the gamma slider is sliding the emphasis between the highlights and shadows. If you move it over here to the right, for example, it may look strange initially. But my next move is going to be to radius here at the top. I'm going to bring my radius over to about this point. Do you see it starting to develop and change a bit? It's changing as it moves over. I'm going to take this a little bit farther. So what you want to do is balance the gamma slider in combination with the radius slider. I'm also going to bring in a little bit of strength. Of course, this can introduce a little bit of glow, but we're not going to take it too far. That looks pretty good. Did you see how it's rounding off? If I move this over to the left, the clouds look a little strange, but if I just bring this over slightly, it brings back really nice white values to the clouds, and I have a good tonality here in the foreground. This is the way it actually looked. It wasn't super bright, and we can move the gamma slider over to the right and we can watch the emphasis. Notice how the emphasis comes forward. The clouds get very dark and the foreground is trying to get lighter, but there's this natural toning position right about there. I don't want this to look super bright in the foreground. I want to be able to read the detail in this area, but I don't want to burn out my clouds. I want to balance the photograph as if you were looking at this with your own human eyes. A really nice balance of tones. Now, I will also go in sometimes and adjust the shadow slider to the left to give a little bit of a boost to my shadows. I want some pretty dark darks there. I might also adjust my highlight adjustment. Notice as I move this to the left, I can bring back some of the tonality in the clouds, which I may have burned off in the process of adjusting strength or radius. Look at this and slide this. I don't want to move this all the way to the left. I want a nice white in my clouds, just like that, to the point of having detail and tone in the clouds, but I don't want them to be flat. Now, here's a crazy one. I'm recommending that you reduce saturation. That's right, not increase saturation, but reduce saturation. But I just find that I can reduce the amount of artifacting and I can get a better base photograph that I can work from. And that's what we're striving for here. We're not striving to finish the image here inside of HDR Pro. I should point that out. We are creating a base image from which we can work with. It gives us the really nice tonality so we're looking for, and we're going to bring it into Photoshop and finish it there. Let me look at this and see if I've got everything right. There's one last thing I'm going to do though. Curves. In many cases, I'll run a little bit of curve. For example, a little bit of an S curve. Notice how I'm bringing up the highlights in the foreground with this section of the curve, which is dealing with the darker shades. And then this section of the curve is dealing with the highlights in the clouds. So I'm just delicately balancing the difference between foreground and background, in this case the highlights and shadows. So a little bit of a curve. If you like these settings, And in fact, sometimes I like to use these same settings on multiple images, and I find that these settings will work on multiple images. Be sure and go up to your presets and save your preset so you can apply it to different images as a beginning and starting point. But be sure and adjust them after you're done because every photograph is different. Okay, this is looking pretty good. It's a great starting point for my project. I'm now going to click OK down here at the bottom. It's just the beginning. Let's get this into Photoshop and continue our processing. So here's our image here inside of Photoshop. Now it looks great, but I think I need to do just a little bit of levels adjustment on this to give it a little bit of a snap. I'm going to go down here to the base and click on my flyout menu to add a levels adjustment right here. I'm going to go ahead and select Auto. Perfect. As we can see, I can turn the visibility off for this layer and then on. Just a nice little snap for the whites and the blacks. Now, we could stop our project right here and say that we are done. But I have one other thing I'd like to try. I'm going to go ahead and merge this adjustment down into my image. From the flyout menu, I'm going to select Merge Down. So I've processed that adjustment into my background image. Next, I'd like to add a little bit of sharpening. That's right, you heard me correctly, sharpening. Now I avoided the detail slider in the HDR controls, but I'm going to add the sharpening here. And I'm going to do it in a very special way. I'm going to go to my Actions panel right here. And there's an action, which of course is available on my website or on the CD from which you are watching this tutorial. And it's called Russell Brown's Detailing Actions. You can access this, load it into Photoshop, and this is how I'm going to sharpen my image because I really like this particular sharpening technique. It was developed by Calvin Hollywood. I'm going to click on it here, and then I'm going to play the action. It's that simple. It's going to super sharpen my image, and it's going to look even more like an HDR-like image. But you watch as I do this because I'm going to do it very delicately. Let's close this down. Let's toggle this closed so we can see our detail layer. So here's before. Turn the visibility on and after. Okay, you may like that, but I think it's too much. I think it enhances the edges too much. However, there's some nice detail happening here in the arch and in the foreground that I like. I don't like it in the clouds. I like nice, soft clouds, but I see some detail in the rocks. So I'm going to turn this on, target my detail layer, hold down my Option key or my Alt key, and click here at the base to add a layer mask. The Option or Alt key will place a black mask here. It will knock this area out. It will mask the area out with the black fill that was achieved by the Option or Alt key. So now I'm going to reveal only the sharpening in the areas that I want. I have my brush tool selected. I move into my work area. I can increase the size of my brush. I happen to be using the closed bracket key on my keyboard. I glance up here to see the opacity setting. I'm going to touch the number 5 key on my keyboard to adjust the opacity to 50%. And I also notice from the flyout menu that my hardness is at 0%. That's very good. I want really soft. I want to be painting with white. I notice that my foreground color is white. And I can now paint in some detail into these rocks. Notice as I paint, the sharpness comes up. Each stroke I make brings up a little bit more sharpness. It's a gentle way to add in a little bit of sharpening only in those areas you want it, and I can turn it off and turn it on. So there you have it. There it is, the official Russell Brown Natural HDR Toning. Give it a try.